they see in all of the data that we have that Joe Biden is behind in the polls, and there is no indication that he can recover. Hey, yo, how are you doing? I am great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back. We are going to talk about the Democratic Party's current catastrophe and the future of politics in the United States. I really felt compelled to go deep on this because I am still seeing too much dishonesty from people who I know to be really well meaning about how deeply damaged a candidate Joe Biden is. I'm going to start by putting some numbers on the table because, again, I am worried that the Democratic Party fanatics, AKA stands, are not in touch with reality. Every source I reference here is going to be linked in the description bar below. Right now, Joe Biden's approval rating is 37%, though I did see a report, a write up in the New York Times today, where Nate Cohn, a statistician, a pollster for New York Times Siena, said it's 36%. So let's just say it's between 36 and 37%. That is a horrible number. It is a horrific number. It's a number about as bad as it ever got for LBJ during the worst parts of the Vietnam War. It is a number almost as bad as it ever got for Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush. Well, actually, I think it's worse than George H.W. Bush. Donald Trump got a little bit lower. A 37% approval rating is a catastrophe. It is an emergency. This is a graph from 538. As you can see, over time, Biden's approval rating has fallen off the cliff. So let's remember the people who I referenced earlier: LBJ, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Donald Trump were all one-term presidents. The precedent for sitting presidents who have approval ratings in the 30s is not good. And by the way, Gaza did not do it. As you can see from this graph, the favorability, the approval rating was already cratering before October of 2023. So let's just go generally to favorability. Currently, Joe Biden has a lower favorability than Donald Trump. These graphs are also from 538. According to Gallup, it hasn't always been this way. Right after the election in 2020, Biden's favorability was 55%, while Trump's favorability was 42%. So it makes perfect sense that voters would opt for Biden. People just liked him more. But despite that significant gap in favorability, the margins of Joe Biden's win in November 2020 were actually much smaller than the statisticians, the pollsters predicted. But he got it out, right? Like, he still did it. It happened. But again, think about how his favorability has cratered. Let's move on. In addition to Biden's approval rating and favorability rating cratering over the last couple of years, Gallup also says that Democratic Party identification has decreased since Joe Biden has been in office. It's now at a record low of 27%. Now, we are in an exceptionally polarized time. So the cratering of the party identification, the divergence, the explosion of independent party identification is to be expected, but it's just something to think about here. If you've heard that Biden supporters of all stripes, from the staunchest, hardest partisans to the political journalists, to the New York Times people, the Washington Post people, the former Obama aides, if you have heard that those people are freaking out after that debate, it's because they see in all of the data that we have that Joe Biden is behind in the polls, and there is no indication that he can recover. Empirically, Democrats are in a much worse place now than they were in both 2016 and 2020. This time in 2016, Clinton was ahead of Trump. Now, the pollsters had to go back and say, "Oh, we undercounted. Our methodology systematically undercounted the Trump voters, so we're going to have to adjust it." They have subsequently made their adjustments, but also in 2020, Joe Biden was ahead as well. So let's take a look at that. These are the polling averages from 2020, and we're comparing them to the polling averages in 2024. Obviously, I made this little graphic a couple of days ago, but you can see there's some big swings, and those swings should inspire deep concern. I made that graphic Tuesday before I saw the Puck News report that polling from the highly trusted Democratic research firm Open Labs indicates Biden's numbers are now even worse in swing states. Sorry, I need to make this big so I can read this because this is important. This is reporting from Peter Hanby in Puck News, published July 2nd, 2024. In their survey of key electoral college states where voters are paying closer attention to the campaign, Biden is doing noticeably worse. The president has fallen by around 2 points in every single core battleground, and also in states that were not even on the 2024 map last week. In the tipping point state of Pennsylvania, Biden now trails by 7 points compared to 5 points before the debate. He has also dropped in Michigan, where he now trails by 7. Open Labs also found that he is now losing by roughly 10 points in Georgia and Arizona, and by almost 9 points in Nevada. Biden is now only winning by a fraction of a point in Virginia, Maine, Minnesota, and New Mexico. And he's now only winning Colorado by around 2 points. Now, going back to that end, Virginia, Maine, Minnesota, and New Mexico were never considered to be on the table. Those are states considered to be solidly Democratic, reliably Democratic in every other context, except for in a Biden Trump matchup. But I do want to be perfectly fair. Nathaniel Rakich of 538 says essentially that polls that are within 3 points of each other, when those polling averages are within 3 points, that's within the margin of error, and they're essentially a toss-up. But as I mentioned, there is new polling coming out of New York Times, Siena College. There's a poll write-up of this in the New York Times by Nate Cohn. And they are now saying that post that debate, that Trump's polling lead is now larger than the margin of error. Now, this is really distressing for a number of reasons. When you listen to professional political consultants or journalists or politicos or political scientists, they all agree that on paper, Joe Biden should be doing much better. But despite his best efforts, those polls are not moving. They have been stagnant for a year and a half. That stagnation has been pretty good for the country because, in an effort to move those polls, Joe Biden has come out really strong for some really good policy. I'm not arguing that the Biden administration's policies are bad. No, they're actually quite good. And we can go off another time on how Joe Biden actually ended up being the more progressive Democratic presidents of the modern era. We don't have time for that. I am arguing that as a candidate, as a major party nominee, he is uniquely damaged, and damaged in a way that puts our democracy at risk. After the CHIPS Act, after the infrastructure bill, after the Inflation Reduction Act, we're still in the 30s. And the pollsters and the journalists and the political scientists are saying this is not adding up. Could it be that 3/4 of registered voters say that Joe Biden is too old to be running for president, and thus they are reacting negatively to him because they don't think that he can effectively do the job no matter what policy gets pushed through? Seems like it. Okay. And it seems like it because the Biden campaign has long known that age has been a huge concern for voters. That's why way back in 2019, before he was the presumptive nominee, He would have his advisors and aides say things to the press on background. There is an article that was written up in Politico from December 2019. It's by Ryan Lizza. The title is Biden Signals to Aides That He Would Only Serve a Single Term. Here's a quote from the story. If Biden is elected, a prominent advisor to the campaign said, he's going to be 82 years old in 4 years, and he won't be running for re-election. That's December 2019. Now, that narrative did not last long because by March 2020, when he was really the presumptive nominee, this is after the sweep in South Carolina, he stood on stage at a campaign event with Gen X Democratic politicians and said, look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. There's an entire generation of leaders you saw stand behind me. They are the future of this country. The Biden campaign for years has intimated that he would be a transition figure. Certainly, when people were sending in their ballots in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, there was an idea of this is a stopgap measure. So this shows up in all kinds of polling, but I'm going to reference an Ipsos poll here. So, right now, Americans are saying that the most important issues to them are immigration and the economy. Americans are also saying that they believe that Donald Trump is the candidate who is most capable of addressing those concerns. Add that to all of the other horrific data we have around Biden, it's looking really bad. The other thing I want to say is I talked about that Open Labs leak, which again is from within the Democratic Party, right? It's really clear now that Democratic Party insiders are leaking things to the press in ways that they would not have done before because they also view Biden as a uniquely damaged candidate. But that report also said that in addition to his horrible debate performance opening him up to new vulnerabilities in previously safe states, that when they do new matchups with younger candidates like Whitmer Trump or Buttigieg Trump or Harris Trump, that those people do better against Trump than Biden is currently doing. Now, that was not previously the case. Now, there's all sorts of ideas about why that's now the case. Now that we're having all of these really open, honest conversations about how deeply damaged a candidate Joe Biden is, people are looking into relatively unknown faces like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, whom everybody seems to love. She gave a great interview to the New York Times if you want to look at that. People are now looking into Wes Moore, the very charismatic, accomplished governor of Maryland, even though he might be a little new. People were already familiar with Buttigieg, but they're like, hey, that's Secretary of Transportation. He might be able to slide on in there. And they're also reconsidering Kamala Harris. Now, that is a big deal because since forever, Kamala Harris has had a worse approval rating than Joe Biden. Now, Kamala is 39 and Joe Biden is 36, 37. The other thing that people who love democracy and freedom and civil rights really have to think about as we're moving forward is what happens if Donald Trump, lying Donald Trump, also probably cognitively challenged Donald Trump, what happens if he chooses a great running mate and there's an incredible reaction to his running mate? And then they get all of this momentum going into the Republican National Convention. So that's where we are. I am begging you, lovers of democracy, please don't tell me the data doesn't matter. Don't tell me that this is all fake. You don't believe it. We are not in a position to be delusional. We have to have some hard conversations. We have to be really honest. All this information has been evident for a long time. I would like to point out another edition of Kimberly has unpopular opinions that are quite frequently, though not always, right. I do remember earlier this year getting dragged when I said, hey, Joe Biden, not doing great cognitively, probably should not be running. Because even then, it was apparent there are some issues. Now, since then, there's more reporting, more leaks that Joe Biden's condition and his ability to do the job have deteriorated rather quickly over the last 6 months. But anybody who was paying attention could see it. So I did get dragged by every Democratic shill and their mother. People for days on end. How dare you? My grandma has Alzheimer's. Okay? That's really not the point. Back in February, Ezra Klein, from his post at the esteemed New York Times, he also said Joe Biden should withdraw from the race because he was not up to the challenge of stumping for president. And all kinds of people came for him as well. David Ignatius said the same thing at the Washington Post. He was laughed at. I saw all kinds of those cable news shows coming for them. But they were right. The party shoved Biden down Democratic-leaning voters' throats, and the electorate refuses to swallow. There was no indication that the electorate was ever going to swallow. Not to mention how often we're seeing now vulnerable executives get swept up in this anti-incumbent mood globally. Look at what's happening in the UK. Okay, well, we don't have time to get into that. But also look at what's happening in France. Biden's candidacy has looked bad for a long time. Now it just looks worse. Let's keep it moving.
To make fundamental changes in civil rights. And those civil rights, by the way, include not just only African Americans, but the LGBT community.
He wants to get away with, get rid of the ability of Medicare
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I oppose.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if
you will determine the outcome of this election, vote. Vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you.
And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
Sides. What American president would ever say Nazis coming out of fields carrying torches, singing the same anti-Semitic bile, carrying swastikas were fine people? And this is a guy who says Hitler's done some good things.
I want to underscore that there is no shame in aging. There is no shame in experiencing cognitive decline. Almost 1 in 3 people over 80 has some kind of dementia. That's not really the point. What we're discussing here is whether or not the people that we are being expected to rally around, whether or not the person who says that he is the stopgap between us and a fascist future, does he have the capacity to bring in swing voters to continue going hard on the stump every single day and win the election when he is currently polling behind? That is the question. And there are so many problems right now with Biden's very clear deterioration. That is not a man who has the capacity to travel the country every single day at 81 years old. That is not a person who has the capacity to communicate to people who are on the fence that he is capable of answering the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and making life or death decisions. It's just not there. Biden's aides understand that. Right after the debate, the leaks started leaking. This is what Biden's closest aide leaked to Axios. They've said, between the lines, Biden's miscues and limitations are more familiar inside the White House. The time of day is important as to which of the two Bidens will appear. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., Biden is dependably engaged, and many of his public events in front of the camera are held within those hours. Outside of that time range or while traveling abroad, Biden is more likely to have verbal miscues and become fatigued, aides told Axios. That's from Alex Thompson to Joe Biden's The Night America Saw the Other One, published June 29th, 2024. If lucidity is conditional, if engagement is conditional, you can't do this job. It's not even an option. And after that debate, the response was horrible. The flash polls were awful. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is, does Joe Biden have the mental and cognitive health to serve as president? 27% said that he does, 72% says he does not. With Trump, 50% say that he does, 49% say he does not. Next, at the debate, which candidate presented ideas clearly? 21% said Biden did, 47% said Trump did. 28% said Biden appeared presidential. 46% of viewers said Trump appeared presidential. 18% of viewers of the debate said Biden inspired confidence. 44% of viewers of the debate said Trump inspired confidence. 21% of debate viewers said that Biden explained plans and policies well. 35%, yes. And 43% said Trump explained his plans and policies well. That's really bad. I also listened to longtime pollster Frank Luntz talk about his poll with swing voters and how horribly that went. We're going to play a clip from Frank Luntz. I'm going to say that before Frank Luntz and his toupee were very right wing, he has moved more toward the center in his polling. But still, he's an expert. He's done this for a long time. We can listen to him.
A question for you. Once your focus group was over, what was the result of the focus group? Did it change anyone's minds? Did anyone land on a candidate?
Yes, they did. I don't know if you're asking because you actually want to know or you're asking because you do know and you want me to say it. 12 of the 14 moved towards Donald Trump. One of the 14 moved towards Joe Biden and one stayed undecided. I have never in my professional life had such an overwhelming result to a presidential debate, to a general election presidential debate. It was absolutely incredible. And person after person talked about how much they regretted it, or talked about how they liked Joe Biden at one point, or talked about how they disliked how Trump behaved. And then they said, but I can't get away from what Joe Biden, his performance. I can't get away from how much trouble he had articulated where he stood. And I got to tell you something. I did not see it in.
That's a big deal. We have reached a crossroads. The Democratic Party needs to publicly and privately be compelling, dare I say, coercing Joe Biden to withdraw from this race so that somebody else can become the nominee. That is the point. There is no path forward. There's no path forward now because you've probably never seen a June debate for the general election. It's never happened before. The reason the Biden campaign wanted to schedule a June election, they fought for it, they brought Donald Trump in, is because they thought that a debate would draw attention and also create momentum for a campaign that is dead. It definitely drew attention, but it had the exact opposite effect. Now, admittedly, the next day he got back on the stump and he did look stronger. So we can take a look at this.
I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job. I know how to get things done. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
Line. That last line, you did it, Joe. The last line was good. Now, we had some problems getting into the last line, but much stronger voice, stronger in demeanor, more color to the face, looked much more alive the next morning. But that also aligns with the things that the aides have leaked about the hours during which Joe Biden is capable of being a solid campaigner. So Biden has said that he's going to get back up again. He has carried this underdog theme with him throughout all of these years. You know, in my reading, I found that it goes back to the 80s when Joe Biden in 1987 was forced to drop out of the presidential race because of a plagiarism scandal. And Joe and Jill Biden have had resentment toward the party and have had regret about that moment ever since. But it is a new dawn, a new day. Jill Biden had a disastrously timed American Vogue cover in which, she said really good, honest things about where the country is and where it's going and how afraid we should be of Donald Trump. We should be very afraid of Donald Trump. That is true. After the debate, the journalist, I believe her name is Maya Singer, called Jill Biden back up and said, "What do you want to say? Because we're all talking about the debate now." Jill Biden reiterated Joe's words and said, "We're going to get back up. We're going to keep going." The quote is, "We will not let those 90 minutes define the 4 years he's been president. We will continue to fight." But what does that even mean? There's no indication that the Biden campaign has a clear plan to fight or fight back or do it meaningfully or figure out a way to inspire confidence. There is a roundtable by Politico. It was consultants, politicians, political scientists. Andrew Gillespie, who is associate professor of political science at Emory University, said that one of the immediate things that the Biden campaign needs to do is do a full physical and mental evaluation, release that information publicly, put all of those fears to rest. The Biden campaign came back and said that they were definitely not going to do it. Though yesterday they did come out, or this is all reporting, right? But yesterday the reporting came out that said Biden had told the Congress people and the governors that he had been checked out by a doctor after the debate, even though his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, also said that same day that he had not been seen by a doctor. They're lying. They're lying. Okay. They're lying. I listened to Pod Save America, and the Pod Save America men who were former Obama aides have gone so hard on this. And I've actually been really surprised by how honest that they've been about this. And one of them, I think it was John Favreau, said, "Look, if I was working with the candidate and they had that kind of debate performance, I would tell them, go out every single day and say, I'm going to debate tomorrow. I will debate next week. I will debate 4 times next month. I will debate you here, there, everywhere. I will debate you, Sam I Am." Biden is not doing that. Why do you think he's not doing that? I don't think that there's anybody who was responsible for prepping Biden for a whole week at Camp David who was particularly surprised by his performance. There's no reason. And of course, they weren't surprised because the newer reporting indicates that those kinds of incidents, those kinds of public lapses, are pretty common. Let's listen to Carl Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein fame discuss it on CNN.
Carl, according to the people you've been talking to, what are you hearing?
Well, these are people, several of them, who are very close to President Biden, who love him, have supported him, have been among them are some people who have raised a lot of money for him. And they are adamant that what we saw the other night, the Joe Biden we saw, is not a one-off, that there have been 15, 20 occasions in the last year and a half when the president has appeared somewhat as he did in that horror show that we witnessed. And what's so significant is the people that this is coming from, and also how many people around the president are aware of such incidents, including some reporters, incidentally, who have witnessed some of them. But here we see tonight, as these people say, President Biden at his absolute best, and yet these people who have supported him, loved him, campaigned for him, see him often, say that in the last 6 months particularly, there has been a marked incidence of cognitive decline and physical infirmity.
What I wonder about is the people who were, working with him at Camp David, allegedly in this intensive debate prep, if there were concerns there about this, and I don't know if you have got any word about that, but how anybody involved in that debate prep, didn't anybody see something?
Well, the debate prep was supervised by Ron Klain, who has been with President Biden for many years. And people I've talked to have all been to Ron Klain in the last year to say, we have a problem. We have a problem.
Now, another reason why we are seeing or hearing more and more of these leaks is because there is a growing concern that Biden remaining at the top of the ticket will drag down the party as a whole. That if there is not enthusiasm around voting for Biden, if people are actually turned off for voting for the Democratic presidential nominee, that everybody under him is also going to suffer. Now, Democrats generally are not unpopular. That red wave that was supposed to happen in 2022 didn't happen. Democrats did great. And they could continue that momentum, save the House, maybe keep that slim Senate majority, maybe not, right? Like, Senate's gone, right? If there is a strong presidential candidate. And I do think that as the Congress people assess the numbers and as their own well-being begins to be imperiled, especially in the House, that we're going to get more and more leaks and more people coming out to say, look, the presidency is gone, but we can at least have the House because unified Republican government under a fascist is a true nightmare. There's no reason to believe that Biden is going to make it the next 4 months without self-destructing again. There's certainly no reason to believe he's going to make it to 2028. That's out of the realm of possibility. On July 2nd, the New York Times published Biden's lapses are said to be increasingly common and worrisome. Now we have suddenly all these people coming out on background. They can't have their names attached to it, but they're saying that Biden's cognitive decline and decrepitude are more and more evidence, that they would not trust him in a room alone with Vladimir Putin, that they have to be careful about the way that they present information to him because he often reacts very negatively when he is being briefed. Okay. I also think this idea that Joe Biden is like the scrappy man from Scranton, Pennsylvania, I hate that framing. I understand the framing because, as I mentioned earlier, globally there is an anti-incumbent, anti-elite mood. And it does help Joe Biden politically to embrace the idea that he is some kind of outsider, but he is not an outsider. He is very literally the most powerful person in the country and one of the most powerful people in the world. It's not gonna work. The other thing I want to say about the Biden thing and why it is so imperative for Joe Biden to withdraw and allow somebody else to be at the top of the ticket before the Democratic National Convention in August is this issue that we're seeing with his deficits is not just a campaigning issue.